Minister, the efforts and the programmes that you're talking about may make some differences, but really I think I wish that the parents of children and the teachers were here responding to what you're saying rather than me, because they're the ones who know how it's failing their children, and how despite all the efforts, the promises, the programmes, and as Gino Kenny said earlier on, the debates that have been happening on this issue for as long as I've been in the Dáil, every year we find parents at their wits' end, unable to cope, meeting barrier after barrier, on waiting lists forever. Them and their children. One waiting list after another. Waiting lists for school. Waiting lists for assessments. Waiting lists for therapies. Therapies that often just never come. I was talking to Pamela beforehand, who was talking about CHO7. Nearly 6,000 people waiting for assessments, which they're legally entitled to. Absolutely critical to get those assessments, because if you don't get that assessment, and then the therapies that flow from it, from the moment the state fails that child's life is being impacted potentially forever. And there's 6,000 people, and Pamela tells me that between January and May in CHO7, how many assessments were done? 22. 22! It's unbelievable. Charlotte, who's up there, whose daughter Kyra, I think, Kyra, excuse me if I pronounced it wrong, Kyra, whose young daughter has had 3 assessments, but isn't going to get her first therapy till 2026. She had to apply to 32 schools. 32 schools. Now, and I will go on about people in all these different, Rachel, who's up there, who briefs me on this on a regular basis, who has her own son with special needs, and she would just say it's just abuse. It's just abuse of the children, the neglect. And in fact, when the Children First guidelines were first drawn up, and then we had a referendum to put children first, the Children First guidelines were very clear that if children didn't get the supports that were necessary and the resources to give them equality and to put them first, to cherish all of the children equally as was promised in the proclamation, that it was a form of abuse, it was a form of neglect. And it is abuse and it is neglect by the state. And people then having to go to court to vindicate their rights. But even when you get your assessment, you go to court, you still won't get the therapies. There was a woman at the public meeting we ran in Dunleary a while ago who said her daughter was first diagnosed when she was, I think, about 12, and she was 17, and in all of that time she got 2 therapies, 2 meetings with an occupational therapist, in all of that time in between. It's just unbelievable. And then I got a briefing from Simon Lewis earlier this summer, you probably know him, detailing the fact that 1/3 of schools, and you've heard this before, but it's incredible after all these years, 1/3 of school actually lost special education teachers this year on this new allocation model. Because you haven't resourced it and you haven't planned for it. And you see, the thing is, as one of the parents, I think it probably was again Pamela when she was briefing us the other day, said, this isn't really rocket science, because we know, we have the CSO, we know how many children roughly there's going to be, or almost exactly how many there's going to be, and we know what proportion of children have disabilities and have special needs. Therefore, there should be school places and provision and resources and supports for all of them. In particular, in a country that has record budget surpluses, that is overflowing with revenues, that has so much money, it literally doesn't know what to do with it. It's putting it away in future funds and all the rest of it, but in the here and now, there's 120 children who don't have school places as we enter into the beginning of the school year, or who have children with special needs, where the state is having to pay, I think it's 70 million a year to transport them to other parts of the country to give them a place, which is totally unsuitable, puts the parents under massive pressure in terms of being able to see their children, because they're having to go somewhere else, or the transport costs, which are way out of their own locality and area. It's just incredible. Or in my area, I could just go through the list. Dáil Educate Together lost one special education teacher this year, leaving only one special education teacher left. But because they haven't got a permanent school building, they're in between a community centre and another place where there are prefabs. So they have to have two. But because of the allocation model, they've only got one. So they simply can't provide. Or Sallynog and Clyney Educate Together, who have asked repeatedly to have a second autism class. They're one of the schools who want another autism class. There are others who are resisting and saying they can do it, they can provide this class, but the Department of Education won't approve it, even though they've asked for it. And then you sort of, the result of this is stories like this, like Aisling and Mary, who are parents. Aisling is an SNA in Dáil Educate Together, which is one child with special education needs in Monkstown Educate Together, and another one in Sallynog and Clyney Educate Together, because there aren't places sufficient in both schools. Right? So at every level, she's affected. Right, and our children, and then there's others who are on the waiting list who simply can't get in. Dalkey School Project, 1 out of 4 special education teacher posts filled. Monkstown Educate Together, 2 teachers recently left. 1 special education teacher left because of the commute times for the teachers were too much. And the cost of housing and accommodation in the area is too much, so they just can't stay in the job. And as a result, that 1 remaining special education teacher now has to go into a mainstream class to cover the other teacher who's left, who was a mainstream teacher, so the children with special needs lose out altogether. It's a disaster. Now, this can be planned for, should be planned for, because we know the numbers, they don't radically change that much, but we fail to do it. And then we have this firefighting exercise, a bit here, a bit there, but actually we're moving around deck chairs on the Titanic, and we can say the same about the CDNT teams and the CAMs, the massive understaffing and so on of these things, where we need to recruit thousands of therapists, of psychologists and so on, the allied professionals, because we are so chronically understaffed and under-resourced in these things. But there's no urgency in terms of the recruitment, or to address the issues of pay and conditions and housing, or even the issue that was brought to me there recently, I didn't know about SNAs who get injured in the course of their work, and then can't work anymore, but they're not actually given any sort of financial assistance after a period of time, after getting injured doing their work. I mean, it's shocking. Now, we are supposed to be signatories to the UNCRPD, which is about equality. Not that we really should need that, because it's in the proclamation that founded this country, and we are failing to provide that equality. It's as simple as that. We are failing to provide that equality. We're failing even to plan for it, and we're doing so in a situation when we have more resources and more wealth in this country than we've ever had before. And as a result, some of our most vulnerable children are being failed, and their parents at their absolute wits' end. It is not fair. So the government have to use the resources that are available to them to give the rights and equality that every single child in this country deserves, whether it is the school places, the education, the resources, the supports, the health supports, the therapies that they need, housing. I haven't even had time to go into that. How the housing crisis is impacting in particular on children with special needs. I could go on. But it's for the people up here that you owe it to, and to the many, many thousands out there, 100,000 waiting for therapies, thousands waiting for their assessments of needs, and schools and teachers, SNAs and all the rest of it who are under such pressure, such stress, so demoralised by all of this. We are failing them, and it has to stop.